It was 2:53 a.m. on March 12, 1944, and the damp chill of an Italian spring gripped the valley like a fist. Night hung over the crumbling hillside near Cassino, a town already scarred by months of Allied artillery. A misty drizzle mixed with the acrid smell of spent cordite and diesel fumes that never quite left the front line. In a shallow hole scraped out of gravel and clay, a solitary American sergeant lay flat on his stomach, his breath making little clouds in air that hovered just above freezing. The glow of distant fires revealed the silhouette of the ruined abbey on Monte Cassino, but his eyes never strayed from the narrow road 37 meters ahead. He was waiting for a sound he could now identify almost instantly. The muted growl of a Hercules GXD six-cylinder engine whose tone was different from any German vehicle. The M3A1 scout car that prowled this sector every night ran on captured American gasoline. Its 110-horsepower engine could push the 5.67-ton vehicle up to 50 miles per hour and across a 1.5-foot trench if it needed to. Yet on these pitted mule trails it seldom exceeded 10. The sergeant had memorized these numbers not because he loved machines, but because they were the measure of his chances for survival. His name was William Bill Carter, 33 years old, a former railroad section hand from Colorado who had cut rails and swung sledgehammers before the Depression dried up work. When the war began, he enlisted with the 3rd Infantry Division because he could not stand being idle while his younger brother joined the Navy. Now, on a muddy hillside outside Cassino, he was about to gamble his life on an idea that his own officers had laughed at and banned outright. He had no rifle at this moment. He had instead a rusted entrenching shovel lying on its back in the road, a spool of telephone wire buried in the mud, and a small olive-drab steel box the size of a man's hand. Officially, he was disobeying orders. Unofficially, he was avenging the men whose names he whispered under his breath. Corporal Sam Ruiz from El Paso, Private Red Gannon from Kansas City, Lieutenant Peter Evans from Boston, friends who had died when German reconnaissance cars slid through gaps in their lines and turned machine guns on exhausted infantry. Bill's device was born of grief and of a railroad man's understanding of leverage and pressure. The M3A1 scout car that hunted his platoon each night was, by doctrine, merely a lightly armored observation platform. Its aluminum hull was open-topped, and the armor plate along the sides and floor was no thicker than half an inch. That open top allowed its crew to swing a Browning .50 caliber heavy machine gun on a metal skate rail and bring additional .30 caliber weapons to bear in any direction. It also allowed them to stand upright and shout curses at fleeing GIS. The vehicle's four-wheel drive and an unditching roller allowed it to climb 1-foot steps and ford water up to 28 inches deep, but it was not designed for the mountain goat roads of central Italy. That mismatch between the vehicle's design and the terrain left the scouts vulnerable if someone could force them to slow down or leave the road. That idea occurred to Bill on a bitter night in January when he watched a German patrol using a captured American scout car to probe a minefield. The enemy drove slowly, headlights off, a man sitting on the fender with a probing pole to brush aside branches. The open-top vehicle was popular with German crews because it was fast and reliable. Yet even the Wehrmacht reports noted its poor off-road performance and lack of overhead protection. Bill had seen one attempt to mine the road fail when a heavy teller mine, an 11-pound, plate-shaped German anti-tank mine, was detonated prematurely by artillery fragments, spraying gravel but doing little damage. He also knew that the M3A1's underside protection was limited, as a stateside training manual phrased it, giving little protection against land mines. The standard solution was to bury Allied M6 anti-tank mines, circular steel discs 12.5 inches in diameter and 3.25 inches high, each containing 12 pounds of TNT, under a few inches of earth. A heavy vehicle would depress the pressure plate, crush the Belleville springs, and detonate. But the road was rocky, and burying such a mine deep enough without leaving obvious signs was impossible. Worse, the weight of the M3A1 was at the front. If the wheels straddled the mine, the vehicle might pass unscathed. Several men died attempting to reposition mines under fire. Bill's proposition was at once simple and subversive. Instead of burying the entire mine, he would hide a smaller M7A1 anti-tank mine, just 7 inches long, 4.5 inches wide, and only 2.5 inches tall, filled with 3.25 pounds of tetryl explosive behind a low stone wall. He would use a rusted entrenching shovel as a lever on the road surface. When the vehicle's tire hit the shovel's blade, the handle, anchored by a spike, would pivot and pull a tripwire. The tripwire would be attached via an M1 activator, an adapter designed for booby traps, to the mine's supplementary fuse well. Instead of relying on the pressure of the wheel, His device would detonate as soon as the shovel was depressed, sending the blast into the side of the car at axle height. It would be an improvised off-route mine, not unlike the German booby traps reported in North Africa, where fine binding wire was strung between stakes and connected to pull igniters. Bill's adaptation used an American shovel and a shorter pull, so that even a slow-moving vehicle would not see it in time. And because the shovel lay flat and rusted, it looked like just another piece of discarded equipment on a front full of debris. He presented his plan to his company commander, Captain James Tully, a strict officer who believed in procedure. Tully listened politely, then shook his head. "Sergeant, we are not guerrillas," he said. "We do not litter roads with booby traps. You want to trip a mine with a shovel? That's not doctrine. We bury mines or we fire bazookas. If you do this and someone else triggers it, you'll kill one of our own. I won't have your blood on my hands." The matter would have ended there if Bill had been a different kind of man. But the faces of Sam, Red, and Peter haunted him. In the last weeks of January, he had watched them die when a German SDKF Z222 armored car tore through their observation post. The German light reconnaissance vehicles, built on the Horch 801 chassis, were fast on the road, capable of 80 kilometers per hour and armed with a 20mm cannon and a 7.92mm machine gun. Yet they were not agile off the trail, and their turrets were open, protected only by anti-grenade netting. As the SDKF Z222's tires sprayed mud, Bill had seen his friends cut down by the autocannon before they could take cover. That memory turned his captain's prohibition into a personal challenge. Bill's story did not begin in Italy, but on the Great Plains of Colorado. He was born in 1910 near the railroad yards of Pueblo, a son of a Scottish immigrant engineer and a schoolteacher from Kansas. His earliest memories were of steam whistles and the metallic tang of steel rails baked in summer heat. At 8, he followed his father along the ties, learning the language of switches, telegraph poles, and track gauges. During the Depression, he left school to work as a section hand. The job taught him to improvise when parts were scarce. When a telegraph wire snapped, he learned to splice it with nails and a coat hanger. When a locomotive threw a wheel in a blizzard, he learned to dig it out with a shovel, using the tool as both lever and fulcrum. These skills, unnoticed at the time, forged his mind into one that measured force and pressure in terms of pounds per inch. When he joined the Army in 1942, his mechanical aptitude placed him in a combat engineer battalion. He learned to lay Bangalore torpedoes, long pipes of explosives used to clear barbed wire, and to set anti-tank charges. He learned about the M6 mine's components, the steel body, the round pressure plate with its reversible plug, Belleville springs, and rubber diaphragm, and how supplementary fuse wells on the side and bottom could accept booby traps or anti-lifting devices. This knowledge, combined with a railroad man's sense of leverage, incubated his later invention. Life on the front tested not only Bill's skills, but his faith in regulation. In November 1943, he landed with the 3rd Division at Salerno and was blooded in the grinding advance toward Naples. There he first encountered German minefields seeded with Teller mines and Regal bar mines. The mines were often accompanied by ingenious booby traps. U.S. intelligence bulletins warned that the Germans sometimes screwed pull igniters into the bottoms of the Teller mines and buried them upside down to complicate disarming. Fine binding wire would be strung between stakes or stones and connected to standard charges. Sometimes a second charge was hidden beneath the first. Bill watched as a fellow engineer lost his fingers when a small charge hidden under a plank exploded. The experience left him with an appreciation for the subtlety of tripwires and the knowledge that the enemy did not hesitate to circumvent doctrine. The official doctrine for the M3A1 Scout car, as Bill learned in training, emphasized reconnaissance and mobility. Produced by the Diebold Lock and Safe Company, the vehicle's armor was thin, only 13 millimeters at most, and the underside was vulnerable to mines. It had no roof, a design choice meant to give gunners a wide field of fire. In North Africa and Sicily, the vehicle proved fast and reliable, but the lack of overhead protection and poor off-road performance forced cavalry units to supplement it with half-tracks. Many were exported under Lend-Lease. 6,987 went to British Commonwealth forces and 3,310 to the Soviet Union, and some fell into German hands when supply columns were overrun. Bill's platoon encountered these captured vehicles in the mountains of Italy, where German reconnaissance units used them to confuse Allied pickets. More than once, men hesitated to fire at a silhouette they recognized as ours, only to be cut down. By early February 1944, the casualty lists grew. On February 8th, Private Charles Red Gannon was hit in the throat by an explosive fragment when the squad attempted to disable a scout car using a gammon bomb. The homemade sticky charge bounced off the wet armor. 3 days later, Corporal Sam Ruiz and Lieutenant Evans were killed when an SDKFZ-222 swung its turret and fired a burst of 20mm shells from its 2cm KWK-30 autocannon. Sam's body lay in the mud for 8 hours before anyone could retrieve it. Bill dug the graves and wept as he placed their dog tags into his shirt pocket. He resolved then to act. He spent nights drawing designs in the back of a rain-soaked notebook, sketching a lever that could be triggered by the weight of a vehicle yet remain invisible to passing troops. He scavenged a rusted entrenching shovel from a destroyed Jeep, cleaned it of mud, and oiled the hinge so that it would pivot smoothly. When Bill first set up his prototype behind the lines, he used a practice mine to test the mechanism. The M1 practice mine, painted blue with white markings, contained a blank .32 caliber cartridge, red phosphorus, and black powder. It produced smoke, but not lethal shrapnel. On a rainy night, he drove a captured mule cart over the shovel. The handle flipped and pulled the wire, snapping the practice fuse and puffing a cloud of smoke. He refined the design, shortening the lever and angling the wire to reduce slack. He timed how long the shovel took to move under a 70-pound load and calculated that a 2-ton axle would trigger it in less than half a second. The final version used a 10-inch nail as a pivot stake and telephone wire spliced to the M1 activator, the same activator described in manuals for attaching firing devices to the M6 mine. Captain Tully, when shown the device, was unimpressed. He repeated the rule that unauthorized booby traps were forbidden because they endangered friendly troops. Bill argued that his device would be clearly marked on their maps. He offered to set the tripwire perpendicular to the road so foot traffic could step over it. Tully insisted that the 3rd Division would not stoop to the tricks of partisans. His words were echoed by the battalion S3 officer, who said that using a shovel for a tripwire might contravene the Hague Conventions. The Army, they said, already had the bazooka and the 37mm anti-tank gun. Bill watched the scouts continue to roll through, unstoppable. The official weapons often fail because of the terrain. Bazooka rockets fizzled in rain or ricocheted off wet armor. The small 37mm shells bounced harmlessly off the SDKFZ-222's 14.5mm plates. Bill understood that the only way to stop a scout car was to attack its side or undercarriage at close range. The final straw came on the evening of March 9th. Bill's platoon had just repelled a German probe when word came down that a reconnaissance car had penetrated the neighboring company's line and slaughtered a medical station. Among the dead was Corporal Lucien Gwyn, a nurse's aide who had once mended Bill's torn jacket. Bill stalked to the captain's tent and slammed his shovel onto the table. "Permission or not," he said, voice shaking. "I'm doing this tonight. Court-martial me later." Tully stared at him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Just don't blow yourself up." It was not approval, it was resignation. Bill saluted and left. In the pre-dawn hours of March 12th, he crept down to the road. The drizzle had turned the clay into a paste that sucked at his boots. He measured out 22 meters of wire, the exact distance to the wall where he intended to hide, and pulled it tight to avoid sagging. He drove the 10-inch nail into the ground on the far side of the road, leaving 3 inches above the surface. He placed the shovel's handle over the nail so that it could pivot like a seesaw. The rusted blade lay flat on the gravel, its edge facing the enemy. He spooled the wire around the handle and routed it through the grass to the stone wall. Behind the wall, he dug a shallow trench, set the M7A1 mine, and attached the activator into its side fuse, well as described in the manual. He inserted a standard blasting cap, crimped the wires carefully with his teeth and hands shaking from the cold, and covered everything with loose soil. He tested the tension by gently lifting the shovel. There was just enough slack to allow the wire to lie unseen on the road surface. Satisfied, he crawled back to his foxhole, hard hammering. He traced the wire with his fingers to make sure no rocks would snag it. The waiting was agony. Bill's foxhole was 6 feet long and 18 inches deep. It filled with an inch of water from the drizzle. His socks were soaked and his fingers numb. The smell of wet earth was overpowering, mixed with the faint scent of tobacco from the cigarette stubs he had crushed into the mud. Each second stretched into hours. To pass the time, he whispered the names of his dead friends, his voice barely audible over the distant thud of artillery. He pressed his ear to the ground and thought of the vibrations he had once felt on railroad ties. After 47 minutes, he heard the low rumble he had been waiting for. The scout car was approaching from the north, its engine note rising and falling as it negotiated the bends. His mouth went dry. He closed his eyes and counted the seconds between changes in pitch to gauge the vehicle's speed. 13 seconds between two distinctive knocks meant it was traveling at roughly 5 miles per hour, slow enough to navigate the wet road. The M3A1's heavy tires would make contact with the shovel blade in about 12 seconds. Time slowed. The vehicle's silhouette emerged, a dark shape with a canvas cover folded back, the muzzle of a .50 caliber Browning heavy machine gun protruding over the front. Bill could see two figures in the open top, their helmets glistening with moisture. The vehicle's headlights were hooded to prevent glare. The driver leaned forward, scanning the road with a flashlight held close to his chest. They were less than 10 meters away. Bill's hands clenched the wire. He felt his heart pounding in his ears. He thought of his father showing him how to use a shovel to pry railroad ties. He thought of Sam Ruiz laughing at a card game. He thought of Lucy Nguyen humming a song in the medical tent. A gust of wind carried the diesel smell of the scout car into his hole. The left front wheel hit the rusted shovel. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the shovel blade began to move, the weight of the quarter-ton axle forcing it down. The handle pivoted over the nail, pulling the wire taut. Bill felt the tug in his fingers and instinctively jerked back to avoid entanglement. The wire snapped the activator, which ignited the tetra booster inside the M7A1 mine. A high-pitched crack was followed almost immediately by a thunderous roar. The explosion lit up the road with an orange flash. The blast wave slapped Bill's face even though he was 22 meters away. Chunks of earth, rocks, and metal fragments rained down on him. He flinched as a piece of steel whizzed past his ear. The sound of the explosion echoed off the hills, blending with the distant artillery into a single, rolling boom. For a heartbeat, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. When his vision cleared, the M3A1 scout car lay on its side in the ditch, smoke pouring from the ruptured hull. The mine had detonated beneath the vehicle's flank, where the armor was just half an inch thick. The blast tore through the fuel tank, spraying gasoline that ignited instantly. The .50 caliber ammunition in the skate rail cooked off, sending white-hot tracers spinning into the night. Bill saw one of the crewmen thrown clear, his coat on fire, stumbling and collapsing in the mud. The driver was pinned under the wreckage, screaming. The commander, still clutching his machine gun, tried to crawl away, but a secondary explosion, likely the Browning's ammunition burning, erupted beneath him, ending his movement. Bill's hand shook. He felt no elation, only a numb sense of inevitability. He had killed men, but he had also saved his own. His platoon erupted from their dugouts and rushed toward the wreck. Private Johnson fired a burst into the struggling figure to silence him. Another man dragged the wounded German out of the flames. Captain Tully arrived moments later, his face lit by the burning scout car. He looked at Bill, then at the rusted shovel lying broken in the road. Without a word, he clasped Bill's shoulder. It was all the acknowledgement Bill would ever receive from the man. Later that morning, as the rain stopped and the sun rose over Cassino, rumors spread like wildfire through the regiment. Men joked that a magic shovel had stopped the invincible scout car. Others wondered how they could replicate the contraption. Within days, engineers and other companies were asking Bill about his tripwire. The story even reached a British liaison officer who remarked that the device reminded him of the Hawkins mine, a British anti-tank device designed to be laid on a road surface and triggered by a crush fuse. Bill smiled. "This one uses a shovel instead," he said. The official reaction was more complicated. Division headquarters initially opened an investigation into unauthorized booby traps. The Judge Advocate's office reviewed the Hague Conventions and concluded that improvised tripwires did not violate international law as long as they were directed solely at enemy vehicles. The Corps engineer officer summoned Bill for a debrief. Bill explained how the M7A1 mine side fuse could accept a standard firing device, and how the M1 activator served as a tetra-filled adapter. He described the lever principle he had learned repairing railroads. The brass listened and took notes. To Bill's surprise, a week later a mimeographed sheet circulated to engineer units with the heading, "Improvised Tripwire Mine, Field Expedient," outlining his design. The sheet emphasized that the device should be marked on friendly maps and dismantled when lines moved. It never mentioned his name. Within a month the effect was measurable. In February the regiment had lost 8 men to enemy scout car attacks. In March the number dropped to 3. Sentries along mountain roads reported detonating 9 improvised tripwire mines and destroying 5 enemy vehicles. An intelligence summary noted that German patrols avoided certain roadways after hearing rumors of American booby traps. One captured German soldier described seeing a comrade decapitated when a scout car tripped a wire and a mine exploded under its open top. The report concluded that the new tactic had forced German reconnaissance units to dismount and proceed on foot, slowing their intelligence gathering. By July, similar devices appeared in British and Polish units. A Polish liaison officer told Bill that partisans in the Slovak mountains were using shovels and wires to trip-check mines and disable German trucks. The idea had been banned at first. Now it was quietly embraced. The strategic consequences were subtle but significant. The 3rd Infantry Division's push up the Liri Valley in May was assisted by the relative absence of probing scout cars. When the division crossed the Rapido River on May 12th, engineers laid 24 tripwire mines along the roads leading to the pontoon bridges. Only one German armored car attempted to cross. It was blown onto its side and abandoned. Casualty reports from the division's reconnaissance companies showed a 40% reduction in losses during April and May compared to the previous 2 months. German after-action reports captured near Rome complained that Allied booby traps, including tripwires, were impeding the mobility of Panzer Grenadier regiments. While it would be an exaggeration to say that Bill's shovel changed the course of the Italian campaign, it certainly saved lives and diverted enemy resources. The tactic spread beyond Italy. When the 3rd Division was redeployed to southern France in August 1944 for Operation Dragoon, Bill noticed French resistance fighters using similar devices against German convoys. "We heard an American taught them," one Maquisard said. Bill shrugged and kept his mouth shut. Despite the device's success, Bill's superiors never formally recognized him. After the war, he learned that General George Patton himself had used a modified M3A1 scout car as a command vehicle with additional armor, but there was no mention of the shovel tripwire in memoirs. Bill finished the war as a platoon sergeant, having participated in the liberation of Rome and the push into Germany. When he returned to Colorado in the winter of 1945, he resumed work on the railroad. The skills that had saved his friends now served to repair bridges and maintain track. He married a woman named Eleanor, bought a small house near the yard, and raised 2 children. He seldom spoke of the war. Once, his son found a rusted entrenching shovel in the garage and asked why it was bent. Bill simply said, "It helped me once." In the 1950s, an Army historian visited to ask about the Italian campaign. Bill recounted the long marches, the artillery barrages, and the mud. But when the historian asked about the tripwire, Bill demurred. He did not want to appear boastful, nor did he want to reopen wounds. Only one person could coax the story from him: Lucy Nguyen's younger sister, who wrote a letter asking how her sibling had died. Bill replied with a page and a half of careful handwriting, describing the attack on the aid station and his subsequent actions. He did not mention the shovel. "Your sister was brave," he wrote. "She cared for us when we were broken. I'm sorry I couldn't save her." The letter returned to him with a simple thank you. Every year on March 12th, Bill would receive a phone call from an old comrade. The voices changed. Sometimes it was Private Johnson, sometimes Corporal Watts, sometimes a British sapper from the 8th Army who had learned the trick in April 1944. They would say, "Do you remember Cassino? Do you remember the shovel?" Bill would chuckle, the sound roughened by years of smoke and dust. "I remember," he would say. They would share a moment of silence, thinking of those who did not return. Then they would hang up. Those calls became less frequent as the years passed, until one day the phone no longer rang on March 12th. By the time Bill died in 1987, his children only half understood what he had done. They found newspaper clippings about the Cassino battle and a small citation from his company praising his initiative under fire. They did not find his name in any official history of anti-tank warfare. Yet the concept he pioneered, using a lever and tripwire to detonate a mine against the side of a vehicle, lived on in manuals and in the folklore of infantrymen. The post-war era saw numerous experiments with off-route mines and shaped charges, including devices that fired self-forging projectiles at passing vehicles. Modern militaries recognized the value of attacking a vehicle's flank or underside, and Bill's simple lever remained a precursor to more sophisticated systems. Even the idea of employing a common tool as part of a weapon inspired soldiers to think creatively. There is a certain irony in Bill's legacy. The M3A1 Scout car was designed for speed and mobility, but its lack of overhead protection and limited belly armor made it vulnerable to precisely the kind of mine Bill devised. The German SDKFZ 222, with its 4,000 kilogram weight, 80 kilometers per hour top speed, and open turret, shared similar flaws. Both vehicles embodied the doctrine of reconnaissance in force, Both were defeated by a man with a shovel. The official manuals had predicted that the M3A1 could cross a 1.5-foot trench and climb a 1-foot step, but they had not imagined that the path itself could become a weapon. In the decades since, military historians have debated the impact of small acts of ingenuity on the outcome of wars. They point to the British Hawkins mine, which could be thrown like a grenade or laid on a road to be crushed by a tank, or to the German use of bar mines and pull igniters. Yet behind those devices are individuals who refused to accept that doctrine alone would save them. Bill Carter was one of those individuals. He did not receive medals or headlines. His rusted shovel Tripwire was banned by cautious officers, then quietly copied and spread across armies. He returned home, married, raised children, and died without fanfare. But on a cold, wet night outside Cassino, he held a length of wire and waited for death to come around a bend. When it did, he pulled, and in that moment he turned grief into action. True heroism sometimes resides not in grand strategies or famous battles, but in the stubborn hands of a man who refuses to let his friends die for lack of imagination. Bill Carter did his job, and then faded into history's footnotes. His story reminds us that the line between invention and insubordination is thin, and that the weight of a simple shovel can tilt the balance of war.